procession of medicine men came into view. James Hannington and his crew of sick men peered outside their tent, watching them in confusion. They were carrying horns brimming with rancid butter, perhaps mixed with blood as well. The stench was so thick it clung to their memories. At their center, an immensely tall man, his whole body shining like bronze in the sun, anointed in castor oil. They were asked to set his chair in the middle of the tent, and horn after horn was driven into the ground around him. A circle of protection. To protect from whom? It was to shield from the missionaries, from the witchcraft of the white man. That was Romwa, king of Buzinza. The irony could not have been lost on Hannington and his companions. They had traveled so far to preach the word of God to people they thought lost in darkness, yet here they were with those same people, and they looked at them as a source of spiritual danger. Was this really the man who had agreed to help them? How exactly had they ended up here? "9 days earlier, January 1st, 1883. Missionaries James Hannington, Reverends Ashe and Gordon began their journey to visit Romwa, king of Buzinza. They struggled. Their illnesses had worsened. Reverend Gordon was so badly off he had to be carried by porters. Reverend Ashe was burning with fever, and Hannington himself was crawling just to move. But they pressed on. Uganda lay north past the Great Lake Nyanza, or Victoria, and without boats, reaching their goal with all their baggage was impossible. To get to Romwa's kingdom, they had to take a canoe on the lake. Specifically, they pushed off the Mwanza Gulf, a narrow rocky inlet on the southern shore of Lake Victoria, controlled by Sukuma chiefdoms. This was not open lake water, but a corridor of granite outcrops. Traders had long funneled through here en route to Ukerewe on the Ukerewe Island. Mwanza itself had become a magnet for merchants, though its leaders often abused their role. When ill treatment grew too much, merchants shifted their business to another place called Kagei. Control of canoes meant control of trade, and it could spark crises of authority. Canoes here were never just about paddling, they were politics. And in Hannington's case, the authority had a face. The boatman who held their passage called himself Mutesa's man, proof that Buganda's presence stretched even here, onto the southern shore of Lake Victoria. The canoes that carried ivory and even slaves southward from Uganda were part of this network, and the old man of the sea, as Hannington bitterly named him, was not a rogue ferryman. He was part of Buganda's shadow on the lake. But their dealings with him proved to be very difficult. You see, Mose demanded more pay, even though they had already agreed on a price. The missionaries were running low on cloth, which was their only way of paying for things. After that was settled, the plan was to leave the next day. But at 2 a.m., the old man of the sea woke up Hannington, insisting that they must depart right now. When they got ready, he then changed his mind. "We leave at daylight," he said. When Hannington refused, Mose's men began throwing their luggage out of the canoes. Hannington tried to stop them and instead ended up stepping into a colony of ants, and he was severely bitten. As infuriating as this was, that was only the beginning. If it wasn't Mose asking for more pay, it was the porters who made it an issue. If it wasn't that, it was the canoe itself, which now had a hole in it after one of Hannington's men fired a gun by mistake. If it wasn't that, it was a downpour of rain. Because remember, they're on the lake. They were drenched, their books, cloth, even their barometers were ruined. The Gulf forced them into the same rhythms as Sukuma traders. Paddle, then land. Negotiate for food. Sometimes people refused. Sometimes they were forced to pay dearly. And at times, they encountered acts of mercy. Against all expectations, a family, upon seeing their misery, not only gave them milk, but also gave up their house for the night while they huddled under a shed in the rain. By the time they arrived at Romwa's, they were bedridden. 3 beds were arranged in the hut, only to be roused by the arrival of the monarch they had come to see. But they soon realized that was not the plan. Even though his medicine men had declared that the white men were harmless, Romwa held Hannington and his companions captive. He demanded gifts, he wanted cloth, and above all, he wanted guns. Cloth they could offer to some degree. Guns they absolutely refused. And in this case, they were already out of cloth. So Hannington gave him the only thing he had, which he described, I think, was a fine robe. Romwa exploded. "I am a great chief. I must have a great present." Hannington would bitterly write, open quotes, "We were betrayed. Instead of the mild sage we had been led to suppose him, we saw the royal savage in his true colors." Close quotes. This continued to happen, and there was only so much that the sick Hannington could tolerate. After forcing one of Hannington's men to give up his gun in exchange for 2 inferior ones, he decided that that was enough, and they were leaving. Romwa shouted at them from behind a rock, still fearful of their witchcraft, demanding that they were to give him 200 cloths as hongo if they left, and that if they did, they would not leave as friends, but instead as enemies. Hannington agreed, saying that he would rather do that than continue to put up with this. Romwa calmed down. Now, this obviously paints Romwa in a bad light. But to understand his actions, we must take a step back and see Buzinza for what it was. A small but strategic kingdom pressed between giants along the south of Lake Victoria. You see, Buzinza sat at the western mouth of the Mwanza Gulf. To the east, the Sukuma chiefdoms controlled the lake's southern trade. To the north, Uganda was rising fast, extending its influence even there through canoe transport. To the south, you had Mirambo's armies raiding and threatening the Arab trade routes. And across the lake, there were the Canoes Islanders, who held their own sway as middlemen in the ivory trade. In this tense geography, every alliance, every visitor, and every gift carried weight. Romwa was not a fool. He knew the Arabs sought ivory and slaves, and for a time he avoided dealing with them. But he also saw that kings like Mutesa of Buganda and Mirambo of Urambo were arming themselves with guns, and he wanted the same. So when word came that Europeans were nearby and wanted to meet him, he did not turn them away. He sent back his messengers, but also he made sure to test them with divinations and demands. Hannington called it betrayal, but for Romwa's side, the situation looked very different. It had been the missionaries who had first sent for him, asking for canoes, and he had agreed. Yet, what king would he be if he wasn't cautious of strangers arriving sick, desperate, and suddenly demanding passage? In this, Romwa was not unlike Kamrasi of Bunyoro, who once sent a body double to meet the explorer Samuel Baker. Baker saw this as deceitful and railed against it. Kamrasi, of course, he saw it as a way of testing whether or not this armed foreigner meant him any harm. So in the same way with Romwa, what the missionaries called treachery was in reality a politics of survival, of controlling access, demanding tribute, and ensuring that power remained firmly in his hands. To accept the missionaries without tribute would have diminished his stature. to release them without reward would have gained him nothing. So he demanded gifts, which was custom, not trifles, not robes, but cloth and guns like Mutesa and Mirambo. The very currency of survival in the world around Lake Victoria. For Hannington and his companions, it felt like captivity, but for Romwa, it was politics, a politics of struggle, a struggle for power, prestige, and protection in a world where to host strangers was to risk everything, and to demand tribute was both his right as king and his duty to survive. Eventually, Romwa relented. Hannington could go, but Ashe and Gordon had to remain. And so on January 22nd, 1883, James Hannington agreed and set off on his own to Uganda.